Welcome to the Open Apple Podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a longtime user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
All right, so with us here, well, with me here today is Blondie Hacks herself, Quinn Dunki. Hello, Quinn.
Hi, Mike.
How are you?
I am fabulous. I am very glad to be here.
Good. Why are you here?
Because I like me some Apple II.
Oh, you do? Because see, I know you from another podcast that I do, the No Quarter thing that I do with Carrington. I think that's where we started emailing back and forth about cabinets and things like that. So it wasn't actually until a little bit later that I discovered that you also were a big Apple II person. How far back does your love of Apple II go?
Well, all the way, I guess. It's
a long way.
It is a long way. I'm very old, you know. Yeah, people always ask me, "Oh, when did you get into technology?" And I don't think there was a time when I wasn't. So yeah, I think I was 4 or 5 years old when my parents brought home an Apple II Plus, and I think that would have been like 1979 or 1980, I guess.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was fairly new, but not brand new at the time, the II Plus, and I think it was intended. My parents weren't sure what they were going to do with it, but they kind of had this sense that these computer things might not be a fad, so maybe they should look into it. And so they thought, well, maybe my dad could use it for his business, or maybe my sister, who's 4 years older than me, might be into it. So they brought it home under one of those pretenses, and it was really too early to try and run a small business on them. The software wasn't there and so on yet. And my sister had no interest in it at all. And as my mom likes to say, I climbed up on the stool one day and haven't got off since.
So it's probably best for your sister then that she wasn't interested, because it's not like she would have got any time on the thing.
Not at all. No, it was like that Planet of the Apes moment. I mean, when that screen lit up and there was angels singing, and I just knew this was my thing. This was it. So I started programming right away and learned some BASIC and wrote a game when I was, I guess it was the following year, so I guess I would have been 6, and then just never stopped. So,
what game did you write?
So it was a railroad simulator sort of thing. So I was also into trains at the time, and
sure. Who isn't?
Yeah, right. They're cool, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So it was so early that I hadn't really learned how to take input yet. As most software engineers will tell you, there's these moments in your education where certain light bulbs go on, whether it's sorting algorithms or pointers or object-oriented concepts. There's these sort of key concepts in programming, and so that was sort of my very, very first one of those. This concept there was a difference between input and output, between the computer spitting crap out and waiting for you to do stuff for it. And so I hadn't figured that out yet. So the quote-unquote game was just sort of a spew of text of telling you what was happening in the quote-unquote game. So it wasn't interactive in the strictest sense.
More of a multimedia presentation than that.
Yeah, I would say so. But I was pretty pleased with it. So, and it's pretty. I like to think it's still on a disk somewhere, but in my parents' basement, I still have that II Plus and I think I have all of the floppies that I ever had for it, but I honestly doubt that I saved it, because it was one of those things where at the time we didn't think this stuff was important, and discs were expensive,
Yeah, they were.
Especially when you're 6. So it's not like my parents were, dumping blank floppies on me. So I'm sure that I probably overwrote it at some point. But
well, someday you'll have to go down to that deep, dank basement and dig it all up.
Yeah.
I imagine you kind of heading down the stairs with a lantern over your head, looking behind you for a GRU as you search for your old discs.
Yes, and blowing the dust off them and screaming at Aziz for more light. Yeah,
exactly. Nice reference.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my parents are a couple thousand miles away at the moment, which is unfortunate, because otherwise, one of these days, I'm going to figure out how to get that machine back into my hands, because I am looking forward to actually doing some archaeology and going through all of those old floppies and seeing which ones are still readable, and who knows what I've saved and what I haven't. Could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, unfortunately, today we have some pretty good tools out there to help recover even bad disks. We can generally get some stuff off. I know there's that CryoFlux thing that's pretty good. It sort of bangs away at the bad sectors until it gets something. And there's the EDD Plus card, and a couple of other things. So, even if it doesn't, you turn it on, you get that IO error, we can still maybe save something from it.
Yeah, cool.
Now, how did you go from basic to assembly language and on forth in your career as a programmer?
Yeah, well, so after a couple of forays into basic, I mean, obviously, like everyone else, it was all about games, and that, I mean, computers served no other purpose as far as I could tell. For all the noise people make about VisiCalc, I think we all know it was really games that were driving the technology forward, and that's largely still true.
Blasphemy.
So it became clear pretty quickly that I wasn't going to be able to make the games that I wanted to make in BASIC. It was so slow. And so I started to get into assembly a little bit, and I did a couple of forays into that, into 6502 assembly. I did a vertical shooter, and never quite got it finished, but I worked on that quite a bit. And let's see, by that point I had an Apple IIc clone, I guess you would call it. It was the Laser 128EX, and it was kind of a neat thing. It was, I guess it was intended to be a 2C clone, but it had a lot of sort of extra bits in it. It had you could speed up the CPU. It went up to 3.6 megahertz, and it actually had an expansion slot on the side of it, so you could actually stick any standard Apple II expansion card on the sides, just hanging off in space.
Wow.
Like for you to put your drink on and break it off, or electrocute yourself, or whatever, which is a pretty bold sort of industrial design, and it actually had a memory expansion area inside it, so you could actually take the plastic case apart and install RAM chips inside it, which was pretty crazy. So yeah, it had a lot of neat features.
Yeah, that was the thing about the clones, is that because they had to differentiate themselves and be better than the original in order to make sales, when you bought these things, it was, generally 6 months to a year after the original came out, but there was so much more neat stuff built in. You were saying the 3.6 megahertz acceleration and these expansion ports. It's great stuff.
Yeah, it was, at the time it made a compelling case. It had all these extra features, and it had a numeric keypad, and it was still compatible with all the 2C peripherals, like the little L-shaped RF modulator that the 2C had. That actually worked on the Laser because it had the same shape to the back of the case, like they thought of that. So yeah, it was I think like half the price or even a third of the 2C. So but the funny thing is, even then, Apple really had that style down, and I wanted a 2C so badly. And I liked my Laser, and I was glad to have it, but boy, deep down I really wanted that 2C, and I still do to this day. I'm still looking for one.
Yeah, there's definitely something about that frog design.
It really is. It's beautiful. Yeah, I'm keeping my eye out for the 2C Plus. That's what I would really like. I'm kind of watching eBay, but they're out there, but they're all kind of going for silly prices, so I'm looking for one that's sort of reasonable. So yeah, the Laser 128 is also still in my parents' basement. And after that, I got an Apple IIGS secondhand. That was probably my favorite, possibly my favorite computer of all time. That thing was just an absolute joy. Everything it did just put a smile on your face. So to me, that was really the peak of what I feel like Steve Wozniak was kind of hoping the Apple II might someday be, because that machine was just kind of magical.
Yeah, I think that was the machine that he left the company for a little while, and he had that plane crash, and when he came back, I think he did a lot of work on I don't know how much, but he did work on the 2GS there. And so I think it's pretty obvious, you can see his fingerprints in that. I remember I walked into, this would have been in high school, 86, high school. So I walked into the local Egghead store, and they had just set one of these things up, and my dad was with me, and he took one look at that and said, that's a great computer, and Apple will never, ever, ever support that. So I'm not going to buy it, because it had all the stuff that Mac didn't. Mac generally kind of felt slow. It had that 8 megahertz Motorola processor, but it was still sort of slow for what it did. It didn't have color, and it wasn't compatible with everybody's software collection, and so he's like, "There's no way, I'm not buying that. Sorry." So
yeah, that was definitely prescient because the 2GS sure took it on the chin right after it was launched.
I think most of those ended up going to schools in their various education packages, and in schools they were just run as as 2Es at 2.8 megahertz.
Yeah, which was kind of sad. And the rumors were, who knows how true this is, the rumors were that they crippled the clock speed intentionally just so it wouldn't compete too much with the Mac, because if it had been faster, it would have been a no-brainer for a lot of people, I think, because it was color and it was backwards compatible, and it was great sound and great graphics. Because the clock speed was the Achilles heel on that thing. That was the only thing holding it back from just being, an Amiga killer, an Atari ST killer, even an early PC killer. So
the decision to put the 65816 chip, the Western Digital chip, in there instead of the Motorola, like those other machines, was again, like, we need to make sure this doesn't compete with the Macintosh.
Yeah.
And that's why today you can buy the transwarp accelerators, and they're very, very expensive.
Yeah, so my 2GS is still in my parents' basement also. And
you go a lot down there in that basement.
Yes, my mom gives me dirty looks every time we come to visit. It's totally tricked out. So I've got the RAM Factor in there, or the RAM Fast in there, and I've got the Transwarp GS in there, and I've got the Sonic Blaster in there. It's an awesome 2GS. I've got a big old hard drive in it. Who knows how much of that still works, but I'm looking forward to digging that out one of these days and finding out.
You have to bring it to KansasFest.
Yeah, well, it's funny you should mention that. I'm actually just looking at the KansasFest website and thinking about going.
Go.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to get into this right now, but...
we'll talk more about that later.
All right, I have some questions about K-Fest, so let's get into that.
So you got the 2GS. Now, did you then eventually make the switch to Macintosh, or did you go to PC, or what did you do for your career stuff?
Yeah, so I stuck with the GS for a really long time because it was, I kept going with the writing games all up through the 2E and everything, but it wasn't really until the GS where I kind of hit my stride, because that was the first machine that was really fast enough to kind of have really good tools and to really be sort of pleasant to write code on. You could write in C comfortably. I mean, the compiler was, slow as all get out, but it was, at least you had something there. It was plausible to write code in C on it, and throw in assembly where you needed it. And, it was, and I ran the Orca environment on it. So Orca C and Orca M, and they had their sort of GNU-like shell environment, which I forget what they called it now.
I think it was GNOME or something.
Yeah, GNO. Yeah, GNO, I think was. Yeah. So I ran that, and that sort of made it into a really nice machine to develop on. It was a great environment, very sort of Unix-like development environment. Great compiler, great assembler. So I ran that for a long time, and that was good enough that I stuck with that for a really long time, well into the point where my friends were all on PCs and so on. So I did eventually switch to the Mac. My mom actually bought a PowerBook 100, very first PowerBook. That thing was a lot of fun, actually. It had the little external floppy drive with the little cable on it. It had the cable the size of a baby's arm that you plugged into the back. And,
a big giant dongle.
Yeah, and it had the little flip up door that was also a kickstand, and it was all very nicely designed and had the cool trackball, and that was the first one, I think. Well, I guess the Mac Portable maybe was first, where it had the keyboard pushed forward and the trackball down in the middle, and had a place to rest your hands. I mean, that's, the standard laptop layout now, but at the time, that was a big deal. Everyone thought it was funny that the keyboard was pushed up and that there was blank space at the bottom.
I remember, I was reading about how everyone thought Apple was nuts because of that.
Yeah, and at the time, it did look a little ridiculous. There was this big wasted space, but of course now it's obviously the right way to do it. So I kind of switched to the Mac at that point, and of course, with that came a lot more sophisticated development environments. You could do C++, and I ran the ThinkC environment on it, which was Symantec, I think, developed that. And from there, I went to my second and last Mac, which was the Centrus 660 AV.
Ooh, nice machine.
And it was kind of a bang for the buck machine. It didn't cost a lot, but was capable of crazy science fiction stuff. Like, I mean, they had that DSP in there that would just do crazy things that Macs wouldn't do again for years later. You know, it would emulate a modem in software, so you didn't need a modem for it. You just had to plug in this adapter that connected the phone jack to the DSP, and it would just emulate whatever modem you wanted. It would do all kinds of speech recognition and synthesis stuff. Way before Siri, you could talk to it and ask it to do stuff for you. It would read your email to you. It would overlay live video on your display. So I used to watch TV in the corner, like at 50% alpha while I was doing schoolwork.
Wow,
I
nice.
mean, yeah, like just crazy technical stunts like that served no useful purpose, but it was just sort of amazing. Then, yeah, Mac stopped doing stuff like that. And then sometime shortly after System 7.1, Mac OS just got so bad that I just couldn't put up with it anymore. The ridiculousness with extensions, and everything was so slow and unstable, and the multitasking was terrible, and so I basically gave up on it until OS 10 Jaguar. Then I took another look at Macs and was like, oh, okay, they got their act together here. So OS 10 was really, really good all of a sudden. So and I've been back ever since.
Now, getting back to the Apple II stuff for just a minute here, I'm looking at your webpage as we're talking here. Why don't you tell me about Veronica?
Owning the Apple II was really formative for a lot of reasons. Obviously, just being a computer that you could do stuff with in 1979 was amazing. It was also amazing to me was the story behind it, that it was just these two guys that had done this, and in particular, that Steve Wozniak had designed and built this thing by himself, that he just sat down in his garage one day and decided to build a computer and did it. And not having any hardware background to speak of, that was always just sort of magic to me. I always understood software. Software just sort of made intuitive sense to me, but hardware was just always magic to me. Could get all the way down to the assembly language, and then below that, it was there be dragons. I guess
that's kind of how it goes. You're either software or hardware, and unless you make a conscious decision to cross that line, it's sort of a mystery on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, and there does seem to be something to it where one or the other is intuitive to you, and rarely do you find people for whom that's true of both. I mean, since I've gotten more into hardware, and I've met lots of hardware people and hung out in hardware forums, to most of them, software is just a bizarre mystery and or just a waste of time. Just the interest and or sort of intuitive grasp of it just isn't there. And there's definitely some sort of differences in how you approach a problem along the lines of, for example, in hardware, everything's happening at the same time. You need to be thinking kind of the whole thing as a system. Whereas in software, you tend to want to do the opposite. You want to kind of break it down and things happen more sequentially. So, and then there's a lot of common ground just because they're both engineering problems, and engineering problems are solved certain ways. You want to have manageable components that talk to each other through isolated interfaces and so on. There's a lot of common ground as well. But so, long story short, a couple years ago, I decided I wanted to know. It had always been a mystery how Steve could sit down and do that, and I wanted to know if I could do that, if I just put my mind to it, because I really wanted to have that experience of building a computer from nothing, or from a handful of chips, similar to what he had done. So I kind of dove in with basically no formal training in electrical engineering. I just kind of dove in. I bought a couple of 6502s on eBay, and
of course you did.
Yeah, I looked at the data sheet and plugged them in and turned them on and started poking around and just built on it from there. And over the course of, I guess it's probably been close to 5 years now at this point. It's now at the point where, so the project became Veronica, and Veronica is my homebrew 8-bit computer. My goal was to get it to what I considered a usable computer, which to me means a computer that you can use to write code for itself. Similar to how you can turn on an Apple II and it dumps you into a ROM monitor prompt, and there's the mini assembler, and you can write code, modify memory, and put code in memory, and jump to that code, and it will run it. That is a self-programmable computer, because once you've got that, now everything else is just a software problem. Right now, now you can build an assembler, you can build an operating system, blah, yada, yada, yada. So, yada, 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 Windows NT, right? So,
right.
And all that stuff is not very interesting to me, because I've spent my whole career, writing software. So that's all a solved problem to me. So, and so just this year, actually, Veronica reached that point where You can turn it on, and you get a prompt, a ROM monitor, and there's a series of ROM monitor commands for viewing memory, and you can modify memory and execute code. And there's a keyboard, and there's gamepads, and there's VGA graphics, and all the stuff that kind of is necessary to make that happen. So, and, obviously it was a sort of a different problem I was solving than what Steve Wozniak had solved, because he was doing it with 1979 chips, whereas I'm doing everything, first of all, with some newer chips that he wouldn't have had, but also I kind of have a different problem to solve because I have to make it work in a modern environment, which turned out to be pretty much the biggest part of the challenge. For example, the keyboard, Steve could just say, well, I'll just put some chips together to scan a keyboard matrix and have it spit out data in a format that's handy for me. And I couldn't really do that unless I wanted to build a keyboard from scratch. So I needed to talk to a USB keyboard. So now you need a whole bunch of chips to somehow interface a USB keyboard to, an 8-bit CPU from 1979. So I kind of had to, I think of it as taking a 6502 and wrapping it in a 1980s bubble. Because the chip has to think it's in 1980, and everything above it has to not be. So, and it's similar for the video display. The video display was easily the most challenging part of it, as probably it was for the Apple II. The more I read about the history of the development of those computers, they were all video generators, frankly, with with a particular CPU in it, whatever was cheapest, and a keyboard attached to it. But really, it was about the video generators. That's the hardest part of the problem by far, and that's what distinguished all the 8-bit home computers from each other, was the quality and nature of their video generators. So for me, it was about a 2-year process to do that. And again, largely the difficulty was because I had to generate VGA. The 8-bit computers were all composite, and honestly, I don't have anything in my house anymore that will read a composite video signal. So, even my TV my TV's got HDMI ports on it and a VGA port. I'm not going to attempt to generate HDMI, so
right.
It was VGA or nothing. You can still buy, fortunately, VGA monitors, and most stuff still has a VGA port on it. But even that, what's next? Thunderbolt video? I don't know. So.
Are you working clean room where you're not referring to any of Woz's old, because Woz documented everything, and there's plenty of documentation out there now on how the Apple II was developed, and schematics and his handwritten code and stuff like that. Are you referencing any of that, or is this sort of just like, I'm going to do this all on my own, and hopefully I will arrive at sort of the same place that Woz did?
I made a fairly conscious effort not to read anything about small computer design practices, and because I really did want to try and learn and figure everything out as much as I could myself. I would start to look stuff up when I got stuck, but as much as possible I tried to just kind of think about how I think it should work and just do it that way and see if I can get that to work. And in hindsight, I think that was a mistake, because I spent weeks and even months stuck on problems that have obvious solutions if you do it the right way in the first place. A classic example of that is the way that Woz interfaced video memory with the CPU. Can be a very difficult problem because, of course, the video generator needs to be scanning memory very frequently and constantly in order to render the screen without any kind of flickering or anything. But the CPU wants to be able to write into that same memory, and so you have to kind of get those two to share that memory. And that's just a classically hard problem in both hardware and software. Two processes sharing, two threads in software sharing memory is hard to get right, and two units of hardware sharing the same RAM chip is hard to get right. And the way Woz did it was to kind of do things on alternate clock cycles, because the 6502 has this kind of unique pattern of clock cycles that it uses to access memory, and there's kind of this little dead zone where this CPU is busy doing stuff internally. So Woz's sort of inspiration there was to grab those little moments of dead time on the bus for the video generator to go in and pull out the memory, read the memory for the video. The final moment of genius there is that it also has the effect of refreshing the dynamic RAM, because Woz used DRAM, which at the time was kind of a bold choice because it's cheaper, but it has to be constantly refreshed or the bits go away in it. It's not like static RAM where you can write data into it, and as long as power is there, it'll remember that. DRAM, you actually have to constantly refresh it, even though the power is still on, or it forgets. So Woz kind of solved all those, that whole mess of problems with one really elegant solution. And if I had known that, I could have done at least something similar and saved myself many, many months of banging my head against the wall trying to figure out a way to do this, how to solve the same problem. So in the end, I ended up doing it in kind of a classically software way, which is sort of speaks to my background. But, in Veronica, the CPU and the video generator talk to each other through a narrow pipe. They send commands back and forth, sort of 2-byte commands and parameters, similar to how like an OpenGL rendering engine works, where the OpenGL rendering engine, or like a 3D accelerator on a modern computer, where the 3D renderer is basically a standalone computer, and it's just receiving little commands from the main computer through a narrow pipe. And that narrow pipe in Veronica is a dual-port RAM, which is pretty high-tech stuff that wouldn't have had access to, or would have been far too expensive for him to use. So dual-port RAM is kind of this magic bullet that solves this problem of different systems sharing memory.
And you've got this all working now.
Yeah, it all works. You can, like I say, you can power it up. There's a USB keyboard. There's I threw on some Nintendo gamepads just for fun because they have a really simple interface. And I put Pong in ROM because why not? Just to sort of exercise the graphics engine. There's kind of some simple sprites that you can move around, and there's text rendering. So yeah, you can fire it up and write some code or play Pong, and that's all it does.
Well, that's got to be a pretty big sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, it's, like I say, it's been kind of a lifelong dream to have something like that. And I learned so much doing it. I can't even remember all of it, how much that I learned. So like sometimes I go in there and I take the back off and I pull out some of the cards, and it's got sort of a backplane design with the various modules plugged into it, the CPU board and RAM and ROM, and sometimes I pull the cards out and I honestly can't remember how some of it works now, because it's sort of like I solved the problem and it was kind of moved on to the next one, and it's easy to forget how much work it really was to get to where you are.
Well, congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Oh, one last question about that. Veronica, would that be because of a certain television show?
It would be. I am a shameless fan. One of the advantages of living in Los Angeles is we get to go to stuff like the cast reunion party that they held right before the premiere of the new movie. I got to go to a Q&A with Kristen Bell and the rest of the cast, and it was fantastic.
Get what's new and exciting in retro computing with 2 News.
Well, as I said in the introduction, co-host of the show, Ken Gagne, has moved on to bigger and better things. He hasn't publicly commented on his reasons for doing that, so I won't comment on them either, but I will say that I still subscribe to and read his JuiceGS magazine every quarter, and it looks like number 2 has just shipped. Volume 19, number 2 for June 2014 has just shipped. It's not in your mailbox yet. You can go to the webpage and read about what you're going to get to read about when it shows up. A lot of interesting articles this month. Let's see, David Schmidt talks about his development of ADT Pro, which has reached version 2.0.0, and since we're talking about that, 2.0, I guess, includes some new stuff for the Apple III, if you're into that sort of thing, which I am. There's also, I guess, some work that's gone into making it work with the Uther Card 2, which is the new Ethernet card that's forthcoming from a2retrosystems.com. I know that beta units have shipped, and David Finnegan over at MacGUI.com has a nice review on this upcoming card. Now, I know as of February, I think, was when they said that they were shipping the beta units out to people. And so I'm wondering if the delay here is because they're looking forward to maybe doing a KansasFest release. I hope so. That'd be great. Andy Malloy has reviewed vintage game consoles, an inside look at Apple, Atari, Commodore, Nintendo, and the greatest gaming platforms of all time. Ken Gagne has reviewed a couple of documentaries about chiptune music. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this magazine, and frankly, if you aren't a subscriber, you're really missing out. So, are you a subscriber, Quinn?
I am not, but it's on my to-do list for sure. I know I'm missing out by not doing that.
Well, if Ken were here, he would chide you.
Well, with good reason.
Let's see, what else do we have here? Got some hardware news. Mike Willegal, you may know that name as the guy who has done the great Apple I reproduction boards. I don't know if any of those are currently available. He does limited runs every now and then And the great thing about his Apple I reproductions is he tries to, I don't think he sells the parts kits anymore. You just get the bare board from him, but he refers you to another company that will sell you a bag of the parts that you need to solder on there. And the parts, I guess, are as close to 1977 sourced as possible. So your reproduction can look as real as the real thing. If you saw the Jobs movie last summer, Ashton Kutcher's character and Josh Gad's character, they're working on the Apple I boards. Those are Mike's boards.
Oh, that's interesting. That must be a real threat once something gets as valuable as the Apple I has become. People are going to start to counterfeit them.
Oh, yeah, I imagine so. Because, if they're selling for $500,000, people will do a lot for money like that.
I'll do a lot for half of that.
Mike has worked on, I think his latest project is the Swift card. Now, the Swift card is a reproduction of Jeff Raskin's Swift designs. Now, I'm not as familiar with the Swift hardware. I think Raskin kind of was more of a Macintosh guy, and that's where his designs went. But as I understand it, the Swift machine was his vision of a new way to work with information and hyperlinks and things like that. Quinn, do you know anything about the Swift?
Yeah, a little bit. I got really interested in it after I saw a video, I think from VCF East maybe. They gave a demo of it, and yeah, it's really interesting. It's easy for us to take for granted how computers work nowadays. The sort of basic flow of you have applications and you have documents and you have long-term storage and short-term storage and how keyboards are basically used to enter data, and it's easy to forget that it wasn't always obvious that this is how it should be. And so this is one of those early experiments, really thinking laterally, way outside the box. It's frankly a lot like we're kind of moving towards things now where, with Spotlight and Google Desktop and things, where the idea is that all of your data is in a big magic lump somewhere and you just search for everything you want. And that's basically what the Swift card was. It was kind of a prescient sort of look at that way of doing things. It was kind of hampered by disk space. It was limited to a single disk was a unit of memory, and had some other weird issues, but really cool ideas. The video is well worth watching.
Yeah, I think that was Mike himself that gave that demonstration at VCF
cool.
9.1. So if you're interested in sort of experimenting and playing around with what Jeff had in mind for a possible vision of the future of computing, definitely check out those cards from Mike. Andrew Weber has done a second run of his TDX stereo card for the Apple IIGS. Now, this isn't, I guess, a sound card in the traditional sense. So, I forgot to look up the details of why this is the case, but the Apple IIGS generates sound in stereo, and then the signal is combined into a mono for output. And it may have been because of the lawsuit when the Beatles publishing company, Apple Records, sued them. Part of the settlement was that Apple wouldn't get into digital music, and there was limitations on what they would do in hardware and software. So I think maybe the 2GS now, your standard 2GS off the shelf is going to output sound in mono, which is fine. It still sounds great. But if you get one of Andrew's cards, this demuxes the signal back into stereo sound. And it's definitely worth the upgrade.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. I mean, unlike, say, a Mockingbird for an Apple IIe, everything benefits from stereo on the GS. I had my original one has the Sonic Blaster in it, and it's fantastic. I mean, basically every game just sounds fantastic, and especially the demo scene really took advantage of that. All the FTA demos and so on just sound incredible.
Nishida Radio is a Japanese outfit. Looks like they've announced that they're working on a working VGA adapter for the Apple IIc. A couple of years ago at KansasFest, there were two German gentlemen, I think they were German, showed up, and they had a very small run of VGA output devices that you could attach to your Apple II and get good VGA output, and those sold out immediately. And there's not really been anything on the market since then, and so this is actually really great news that something is being worked on, because as you mentioned, Quinn, you don't have anything in your house that'll run composite signals anymore, and I don't think I do either, at least not working. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that that's the case for a lot of people. And as these old CRTs age and begin to break down, you're sort of left with not much in the way of options other than finding expensive monitors on eBay. And, you got to deal with storing any of these CRTs that are not in use. And if you're like me and you kind of collect stuff, you get a storage unit that fills up really quickly with big, heavy monitors. So having the ability to output to like a flat panel and getting a good VGA signal for the graphics would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that's huge. VGA especially. And yeah, Nishida Radio, that guy is a wizard. He's got stuff on his site that it's everything that you hope someone would make, and he's making it. And yeah, so it's similar to the problem I had with Veronica of having to wrap the 6502 in an 80s bubble. Our vintage computers, it's the same thing. We kind of have to wrap them in a bubble that's constantly getting updated because, the computers are going to stay working for probably decades still, but it's the disk drives and the monitors and everything around the computer that fails and needs constant upgrading.
Now, I don't know that much about hardware design. Do you think the work that you've done with Veronica could eventually be adapted to some sort of VGA output for existing Apple computers?
Not the VGA portion, but a lot of the other stuff could for sure. My USB keyboard interface, my Nintendo gamepad interface, that stuff would actually be pretty easy to convert over to Apple II because the bus structure of Veronica is almost identical to the Apple II because, it's based on the 6502 and there's sort of one obvious right way to build your bus and your memory mapping and so on once you've committed to that chipset. So a lot of that stuff would be easy to convert. The VGA interface is a little too weird and frankly isn't that good. So I wouldn't inflict it on the Apple II in any case. Now, is it true that Nishida Radio is taking a break? I heard a rumor that he might be taking a break from making stuff for a while.
I don't know.
I hope that's not true because he's doing a great service.
Yeah, that would be disappointing. We'll definitely check that out and include a note in our show notes one way or the other on that. But even if Nishida Radio stops selling things related to the Apple II, we do have some good news on that front. Ultimate Apple II and ReactiveMicro.com, they're sort of sister stores. They have reopened for business. Which is great because for a long time they were the only place to go if you needed a ROM for your SCSI card burned or something like that, or if you have a transwarp and it's stock and you want to go 14 megahertz instead of 7 megahertz, they would do that for you. And when they closed their business for a little while, there was a big vacuum there, and it was sort of frustrating it was especially frustrating for me because they didn't take their stores down. So you could go and look at the stuff that you could no longer buy from them.
Oh, that was the worst. I used to Google stuff, trying to solve problems with Apple IIs, and their stuff would come up in the search results, and it was like a big bucket of puppies on the other side of bulletproof glass. Could look but not touch.
But they're back in business now. I don't know if they're up 100% to the inventory levels that they were before. I know that Ultimate Apple II is selling a couple of items, but not everything in their inventory. And Reactive Micro might be the same way. You'll have to contact them if there's anything that you want and you're not sure about. But it's great news that they're back.
That is terrific news. Is it true that they could overclock a transwarp to 14 megahertz?
Yeah.
Wow, that's remarkable because mine runs at 7, the factory, and you could make toast on it. So I'm really curious how they double the clock speed on that thing.
Yeah, I think the fastest working transwarp that I've seen was at 18 megahertz. Oof. Now, I guess these, because of the vagaries of board production back in the 80s, and I don't know if there was some weird code stuff going on there. Not every board can go 18 megahertz. That's a very rare thing. And once you start getting up into the higher, 15, 16, you run into the boards that just won't go beyond a certain speed. But I think most boards you can push to 14 reliably without too much work, and it's a standard set of fixes and updates, and they would do those for you for a set amount. I forget what it was, and definitely well worth it if you want your 2GS running it as fast as it'll go.
Oh yeah, 14 megahertz would just scream. Oh, that's amazing.
It is sort of funny to watch the games that used to rely on the CPU signal for timing, and you speed them up and they become unplayable. Games like Lode Runner and things like that, where you just speeds across the screen and right into a bad guy trap or something like that.
Yeah, that was actually a big problem on the Laser 128 because it had the overclocked CPU option as well, and it had 3 speeds: 1 megahertz, 2.2 or something, and 3.6. And most stuff wouldn't run at 3.6; it would actually just crash most software. So you didn't actually get to use that option much. But the double speed was great.
So they didn't have the acceleration completely working on the Laser. That's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably hardware-wise it was fine, but there just seemed to be a lot of software that didn't cope with it. My guess is it messed up interrupt timing or something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I know that the accelerators for the 2E, for the Apple II line, the 2 Plus and the 2E, those all ran basically at 3 megahertz as well. There was the Rocket chip, which I think went at 5 and 10 megahertz, and there was a Zip chip that went at 4 and 8 megahertz. But most of them, like the Transwarp card and the Titan accelerators, those all ran at 3.6. And as long as you set your slot speeds and you were kind of careful, everything pretty much ran at those speeds, except those games that relied on machine timing.
Yeah, I think they had a much better sorted. I'm pretty sure the Laser was literally just an overclock on the stock CPU because
Gotcha.
that characteristic Apple beep was actually higher pitched because it was actually beeping faster. Whereas a friend of mine had a 2C with a 10 megahertz Zip chip in it, and I was very, very jealous of that. And that thing just screamed, but everything ran perfectly normal on it and had no trouble with it at all, but it just screamed in all the ways that you wanted it to scream. So it was kind of an awesome machine.
Yeah, definitely watching AppleWorks do its thing at 8 or 10 megahertz is impressive after 1 megahertz for so many years.
Yeah, and he actually wrote his own version of Unix on it, and he did all of the text, just rendering the text in double high res, so he could get special characters and better density on the text, and he was able to do that no problem because of the Zip chip.
Nice. You'd mentioned that we talk a lot about the monitors failing, and if you're an Apple III enthusiast, you'll notice that the big, I don't know if it's failing necessarily, but the big problem with the Apple IIIs these days is that floppy drive that seems just to go out of alignment or out of acceptable speed all the time. I mean, I find myself constantly having to readjust those things. Tony Diaz, who is the sponsor for KansasFest, every year he usually gives a session or two on how to clean and repair a various piece of Apple II hardware. And one that he likes to give a lot is repairing the 3.5-inch drive mechanisms, because we all have them, and it's a perennially popular topic. It's not difficult. It's just that not everybody knows how to do it. And so he's finally decided to make that available to everybody. If you go to youtube.com, we'll have the link in the show notes. He's got a video up that goes through step-by-step on what you need to know about cleaning, adjusting, and repairing your 3.5-inch drive. Definitely well worth several viewings.
Yeah, the Apple III had the full height 5.25 drive, right? So was that the same drive that was in the Apple II?
Yeah, it's basically the same drive. It's just the analog logic card was different for the 3 than the Disk 2 controller for the Apple II. Okay,
because so the Disk 2 drives, their issue was they were belt drive, and so there was literally a little rubber band in there, and the belt would stretch over time. So they would slow down, they would slow down over time because the belt would stretch, and so that's why they kind of had to. And the danger with those was that over time, users would, if you were not fastidious about checking the speed on it, over time it would still work. It's just your disks would be getting written at a different speed, and then they wouldn't read back later. If you ever went back and corrected the speed on it, a bunch of your disks were no longer readable because they, been gradually slowed down as the drive was slowing down. So you kind of had to be meticulous about checking the speed so you didn't accidentally write a bunch of disks that you then couldn't read back after you fixed it.
Well, it is an interesting form of copy protection.
Yes, that's right. But they fixed all that with the later the Duo disks, and the later the half height drives were all direct drives, so they didn't have that issue.
We talked about acceleration, the transwarp and things like that. Apparently, it's now going to be possible to have 16 megabytes of RAM in your Apple IIe. I don't know why on earth you would want that much memory, but Matt Jenkins is working on a prototype for a RamWorks clone that he calls ScramWorks, and he was going to do an 8 meg version, but he said it was just as easy to do a 16 meg card. So if you want it, I guess you'll be able to get that much memory.
That's witchcraft. Although I will say that I had, so I mentioned earlier, the Laser 128 had the RAM expansion capability inside the machine. If you crack open the case, there was actually an unpopulated kind of RAM expansion board. And if you populated it, which I did, I stuck a bunch of chips in there, and you could get it up to 512K. And the way it worked was actually just as a RAM disk in ProDOS. So it was, you couldn't use it for anything else. Obviously you couldn't use it as system memory, but you could use it as a RAM disk, and so that was really useful. This was sort of pre-hard drives, so it was a way to have mass storage when you were developing code. It was a place to put your temp files for the for the assembler or things like that. And what it was really great for was downloading software from BBSs, because frequently, you'd have if you didn't have enough floppy drives, or frequently the files were too large to fit on one drive, so on one disk. So you'd have to babysit the download, because you'd have to swap disks in the middle of it. So this saved you having to do that. So you could do those really long overnight downloads of multi-disc games. Legally obtained shareware software without having to babysit it. So that was pretty slick.
I know a lot of people, well, not a lot, but I know that some people. This especially seemed to be a popular thing to do for people who were big AppleWorks fans. Was you would get the RAM saver? Is that what it was called? I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head. It's a battery backed up RAM solution for your Apple II. So when you shut the computer off, memory wasn't lost. So you could set up this RAM disk, load up AppleWorks and all your files in there, and when you powered it up, it was just instantly there.
That's right. I'd forgotten about that. I remember the ads for that in the magazines, now that you say it. And yeah, which would have been really quite powerful, actually.
I'm going to have to get a hold of one of those things and try that out. So we talked a lot about hardware that works in or with the Apple II itself. This is a piece of hardware that's not specifically for the Apple. It is sort of because, all right, I'll just get into this. Charles Mangan, probably know that name from, he's the guy who put a Mac Mini inside a Disk 2 drive, and then he put another Mac Mini in an Apple IIc case. And last year he came to KansasFest, and he's got these USB joystick connectors that allow you to use your old craft joystick, Apple II joystick, on your modern platform, or you can get one going the other way, so you can use a modern USB joystick on your old Apple II. Got a lot of great stuff like that. He has also come up with this Disk 2 style as a USB SD card reader. So basically it's a 3D printed SD card reader that looks like a miniature Disk 2 drive. I mean, the little red light comes on the front and everything. It's pretty darn cool. He's got a demo video that you can watch on YouTube. You can buy these things. The SD card reader is $50 from his Retro Connector Etsy store. He's also got an Apple II, and this is, to me, really cool. It's a 3D printed Apple II case for your Raspberry Pi. So it's a mini Apple II case, and you can tell him when you order this whether you want the black Bell & Howell Apple II Plus or an Apple IIe Platinum or the standard beige. And and he will print this out for you. The case is hand painted, and it's a case for your Raspberry Pi card, which I think is really darn cool. And
these are both adorable. The attention to detail on them is fantastic. So yeah, run, don't walk to his Etsy store.
The Raspberry Pi case is a little more expensive. That's $115. But yeah, I can't see why you wouldn't want one of these, especially, no self-respecting Apple II fan should be without this stuff. Now, we talked about Mike Willeagle's Apple One replica boards. Now, in Mike's case, it is a look-alike, so that when you hold this thing up to a real Apple One, unless you were really looking closely and you really knew what you were doing, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But Vince Briel, who's another hardware hacker extraordinaire type, he also has an Apple One replica. He calls it the Replica One Plus. This is a hobby kit that you make yourself, but it uses modern parts to emulate an Apple One. Earlier this year, he had released the 10th anniversary edition, and it had kind of the red board, and it had the special 10th anniversary edition silk screened on the PCB. He ran out of those pretty quickly, so he released a second run, which is basically the same as the first one. It's just that you get the standard green PCB instead of the pretty red one. So the replica one, you can order from Vince. The kit is $149. He will assemble it for you. That's an additional $50. It's $199 if you do it that way. And then you can also buy, there's a slot expander and a couple of other accessories that you can buy and plug in. I know that every year at well, not every year, but for the past few, maybe 5 or 6 years at KansasFest, he's showed up and done interactive sessions where he will sell you one of these and then help you put it together and test it. And a lot of people do this. I did it one year. It's great fun. You don't have to know anything about soldering. He'll help you. It's very simple. I know that soldering can be a scary thing because it's hot metal touching stuff, and that's always scary for new people. And this year, Vince will be back at KansasFest. He's announced another workshop. And it looks like this year he'll be selling something called the Superboard 3, which is based on the Ohio Scientific Superboard. If you're into OSI computers, I don't know how many Apple II fans out there are into that, but he has a replica kit for one of those that he'll sell and help you build. He'll be doing a workshop on the Replica 1, as well as the Pocket Term, which is a single board terminal using a parallax propeller microcontroller to emulate a VT100 terminal. And he will also be doing his Micro Kim, which is a reduced sized replica of the Kim 1. So lots of interesting and great stuff happening at KansasFest this year. If you're not going, I think you're really going to be missing out.
Yeah, Vince's kits are fantastic. They're so well put together, and really nice way to learn how to solder. And when you're done, you have something really cool that you can play with.
Are you going to attend one of his sessions at KansasFest, Quinn?
Well, if I'm going to KansasFest, then that seems like a no-brainer.
And are you going to KansasFest, Quinn?
Well, I'm seriously considering it.
What does that mean?
Well, I would say I'm perhaps the typical first-time goer to KansasFest. I'm interested, but have questions, and I'm unsure what it's all about exactly.
Well, as someone who's been going for a while now, here's your chance to ask.
All right. So it sounds...
See how smooth that was.
Yeah, good segue. I couldn't tell. Yeah, the whole thing sounds like it's a lot of fun, a lot of like-minded kinds of folks. I guess it seems like it's quite long for a conference, 6 days. So I'm wondering, my first question, I guess, is what activities are there to fill all of that time?
You'd be surprised, actually. It's during the day, it's sessions given by the attendees usually. In years past, way past, Apple itself would show up, because I think KansasFest evolved from the Apple Fest, Apple Developers Conference, which was put on at one point by Apple, and then it was put on by somebody else, and Apple would show up and give sessions, and then it was put on and Apple no longer showed up because they didn't want to be talking about the Apple II anymore. But there's a wide variety of sessions that take place during the day. You know, you got everything from the latest programming techniques to software releases. You got the hardware sessions that go on that we've talked about. You got me. I'm going to be talking about the Apple III stuff because that's what I like to do. Martin Hay who's been showing up recently, for example. He did sessions on boot code tracing and how to crack your favorite piece of Apple II software that you were never able to copy in your youth. And there's less specific stuff. So Melissa Barron, she does glitch art. She's showed up recently. She and her, I think they're married. She and her husband, Dan, who we refer to him, I think, a lot as Crew. He does a lot of music and Apple II visual art. They did a session on how to create your own floppy jackets out of construction paper and other interesting materials to make them more than just the plain folded piece of white paper if you want. So, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on all week long. And in the evenings, we tend to, I think, we go out to a couple of local restaurants, and I know that if you're a night owl, then there are late night runs to Steak and Shake at 3 a.m. and that sort of thing. So it really is nonstop action. I thought the first time when I went that I would, get bored quickly, and I just never did, because there was always more stuff to do.
Okay, so the all day, every day, it's like there's lots to do, in other words.
Yes.
Like. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are all of the sessions that people are doing all listed on the website, or?
I think most of them are. There are some people who like to do surprise releases, or they've got a big secret planned and they don't want to spoil it. So it'll be, a mystery hardware session. And it might be, the release of the Ethernet 2 or, a few years back, it was the release of the TCP/IP stack for the Apple IIGS and the web browser that went along with it, which shocked everybody. And so I think you'll see kind of the more common ones listed there, and there might be a few that they're not ready to announce yet.
Okay. Is there like a vendor area as well where you can buy cool bits?
Every Saturday morning, there's a vendor fair, and it's recently also become an exhibition thing, so you can set up your cool stuff and show off to other people. But Saturday morning, I think for like 4 to 6 hours, there's a vendor fair that goes on, and you can buy and sell and swap. Okay. And of course, then there are people there who have stuff that they're just going to sell, and if you want to buy something, you can make an offer or whatever. There's nothing stopping that from happening. And Sean Fahey, who runs A2Central.com, he has, I guess, several garages full of Apple II stuff, and his wife recently has been like, get rid of it, get rid of some of that stuff. So the past few years, he showed up with a bus full of stuff that's, kind of I'm putting this out here, take what you want, and if you feel like tipping me, there's a jar over there kind of a thing.
Okay. Is there a good mix of people that come, men, women, people from all walks of life?
Well, it's mostly aging white men, unfortunately.
Okay.
There are definitely some women who show up every year. Melissa's been coming regularly. Like I said, I know that Margaret Anderson, she's kind of an Apple II game programmer from way back. She shows up. It's not just all pasty white men.
Good to know. Good to know. Okay. Well, it sounds pretty great.
Unfortunately, you've already missed the early bird pricing that ended June 1st, but you can still register and show up. So
it sounds great. Is this podcast going to come out before the end of registration?
Well, yes. I'm hoping to get this up here in the next day or two.
Okay, because I think I can announce that I'm going to come this year. So everyone who's listening to this should register quick and make sure that I'm not the only first timer there.
I'm pretty certain that you won't be the only first time. You might be the only first timer female there. But we did have a couple of other. This happened a while back now. See, unfortunately, because of the gap between when Ken stopped and Open Apple went on hiatus for a couple of months, the news has sort of built up, and some of these items are sort of slipping into the past a little bit. But a couple that are probably worth mentioning. One is that VCF Southeast 2.0 happened. The original news item that I had on the spreadsheet was about the Kickstarter funding project that they had for VCF Southeast 2.0. That was successful, and it looks like the actual convention happened May 3rd and 4th in Roswell, Georgia. I think that the Apple Pop-Up Museum that was there last year and was such a popular thing was back. I'm not seeing any immediate links to pictures or anything, but I imagine if you look around online, they're out there, and if I find them, I'll put a link in the show notes. But it's neat to see that these conventions are happening and that new ones are starting up like this. KansasFest has been around for years and years. The original VCF out on the West Coast happened in the late 90s and hasn't happened since. So it's great to see some things kind of popping up to take their place. The past few years, we've seen a lot of books published for the Apple II. David Finnegan, we mentioned him earlier as part of the Ethernet project. He also recently, well, I guess not recently anymore, published the new Apple II User's Guide. The What's Where in the Apple II has been republished as an ebook that you can buy. It's very cool. I suggest you check it out if you haven't already. If you're into programming or design at all, that book is invaluable because it outlines basically every memory position in the Apple II, the ROM, all that stuff. And it looks like Roger Wagner's Assembly Lines is going to be republished along with a lost volume 2. So what this is that Assembly Lines was originally a column in Soft Talk magazine, and they gathered up these columns and published them as a book called Assembly Lines. And Roger had enough material for volume 2 that he was going to publish, and then Soft Talk stopped publishing and they went under. all of that stuff that he had collected is now going to be re-released, and his original will be republished as well. So if you're at all interested in learning 6502 assembly language, this book and this series of columns has been one of the most highly recommended over the years for beginners. So I would suggest not missing this.
And I get really excited to seeing this stuff republished. I think probably like a lot of people, I grew up in sort of a remote area, and of course pre-internet, a lot of the problem learning the program in those days was just getting information. Getting the books that had this information in it was, that was just gold. So a lot of us were limited to whatever sad little books about BASIC were in the local library and or whatever we could just figure out by banging away on our own for hours and hours. So it's great that you can kind of pick this stuff up now and learn assembly language now on an Apple II and have resources like this at your fingertips. Is awesome.
A lot of the books these days, they've been out of print for years. The libraries got rid of their copies a long time ago. So you're limited to searching whatever happens to be available on, Abe Books and in the used marketplaces, or eBay, where you're going to pay $100 for one of these books. And yeah, there are ongoing scanning projects to turn all of these things into digital documents, and there's a lot of progress there, but there's still a lot of stuff that's not easily available to somebody who says, hey, I got $20 to throw at you. Where can I get this? Well, you can't anymore unless it's going to require a lot of work. So when things like this come back up, it's refreshing, and this is happening.
Yeah, this information has to be preserved if we want to keep using these machines. I mean, if someone wants to sit down and write a printer driver for, the Apple IIe or something now, it could be very difficult to do that because the books that would help you do that are long gone.
An interesting project that's happening that's not really, I guess it's more of a hardware-related thing. Brutal Deluxe, the French programming supergroup, that's Antoine and Olivier, have decided that they're going to determine how many Apple IIGSs were made. Apple, of course, is notorious for not releasing any information, the behind-the-scenes stuff about sales or numbers or anything. So we don't actually know how many 2GSs were made. We don't know, the run of serial numbers or anything like that. But these guys, being the geniuses that they are, have come up with an algorithm where if you contribute your serial number to them, and they're building this database, and they're able to, I guess, intelligently estimate how many were produced by year, and the more numbers they get, the more accurate their estimate becomes. So if you have a stack of 2GSs, send them an email that's got your serial numbers in it, contribute to the project, and help make it a better thing.
And I'd like to throw a shameless plug out to Brutal Deluxe for the awesome work that they're doing with modern development on the 2GS. They're doing some great cross-platform tools. They've got a Sprite compiler and some really, really cool other stuff. If you want to write a game now for the 2GS using their tools, it's so much easier than it was back then.
Yeah, what's neat about them, other than the fact that they're still publishing 2GS software, which is really cool, is that they seem to be very good at writing documentation about this that even somebody who really doesn't understand that much about 2GS sprites, for example, can read through this and figure out what's going on. So it's not, there's definitely advanced information in there, and you'll learn a lot, even if you've been doing this stuff for decades. But if you're a beginner, you're not going to be lost 3 paragraphs in.
Yeah, and their dedication to the platform is just astounding. They were probably single-handedly responsible for my sticking with the GS as long as I did. Their group and the predecessors, Ninja Force and FTA, and those guys were cranking out software and just demonstrating what the machine was capable of. That sort of kept you dedicated to it long after your friends were all running PCs.
Inspiring generations of 2GS programmers.
That's right.
Quinn, do you watch a lot of television?
I do. I'm a big fan of the new Golden Age shows, Walking Dead and so on.
Have you been keeping up with this new show, Halt and Catch Fire?
I have, yes. Actually, it's gotten really quite good.
Yeah. So you and I talked about this a while back, I think, when the first episode came out, and we were kind of like, well, this looks good, but we'll kind of reserve judgment and see how it goes. And so you're pleased with the progression of the show so far?
Yeah, I found the first episode was a little bumpy because I got a little too caught up in the technical and legal errors in it. As someone who, of course, we lived through that era, and I'm also something of a student of it. I'm really fascinated by the interactions between all those early computer companies, how when they were all suing each other and so on. And this first big shakeout was happening, and so they got a lot of that stuff wrong, and they got the story of the title phrase of the show wrong, which also bothered me. But quickly they got past all that, and they just got into the character development. And as a character drama that happens to be set in the 80s, it's actually turning out to be quite good.
Yeah, so for those who don't know what we're talking about, Halt and Catch Fire is a show on AMC, which is sort of like if this is like Mad Men, but instead of for the sales industry, it's for the early computer industry. And it's based on a fictional company called Cardiff, I think, based in Texas. And I think it's sort of loosely based on the story of Compaq and their efforts to reverse engineer IBM's BIOS and turn that into a viable computer project, but to do it clean room and legally so that they weren't just ripping off code and stamping it onto chips. The reason that so many of the early clones failed was because they just stole the code and reburned chips and stuck them in their own machines and sold them. And in fact, it may have been Franklin who got caught doing this, and the reason Apple was able to catch them was because the typos were the same in the code comments. And that's how they knew that they had stolen Apple's code and put it in the Franklin. And, courts take a dim view of that sort of thing and shut them down pretty quickly. Well, Compaq figured out that if they were going to be successful at doing this, they were going to have to do a clean room reverse engineering, which means that the people who were writing the BIOS code were not able to see IBM's code, and yet they had to come up with a way to make it run IBM's hardware. And so And a lot of it's fictionalized, and they take a lot of shortcuts because you got an hour-long drama television show, and sometimes the truth doesn't make a good story, and so they fudge things because you're watching the TV show because you're watching a story, not because you're watching a documentary. And as with most television shows, the first couple of episodes, especially if it's a character-driven drama like this one, can be difficult because the actors aren't familiar with their characters really, and the writers haven't really fleshed out storylines and things, and so they can be sort of rough. But I think they've really done a good job of kind of overcoming those initial bumps, and the story is great so far. I love it. Yeah,
they're hitting their stride, and it's honestly a good watch for anybody who just grew up in the 80s, because they get all the stuff right that Hollywood gets right, which is, the soda cans are period correct, and the wallpaper and the cars and the hairstyles are all correct, and so it's just a great period piece, and it's also a great sort of exploration of possibly one of the first good examples of a disruptive technology. These home computers coming in and shaking up the computer industry, which until then was built on mainframes with service contracts, and the whole profit model and structure of the companies that did that was all wrong for home computers. So it's kind of a good exploration of that as well.
Now, it seems like maybe they're starting to pay attention to their online criticism. I have no evidence of this directly other than that the little kind of in-jokes and Easter eggs that they're throwing in there are starting to get better. Spoiler alert here, folks. The most recent episode, there was a lot of talk about the mainframe computer game Adventure and how the engineers would stay late to play this game. And there's a lot of in-jokes and things that happen in the game that they got right in the dialogue of the show.
Yeah, and they make a number of references to Apple also, which is pretty entertaining because, of course, at the time, Apple was, in fact, the 800-pound gorilla in the home computer market. And so it's funny to hear them talk about Apple that way. So we're nowadays so used to Apple being the underdog in every market.
That's true. Yeah. Now, of course, no show is perfect without its little problems, and I'm a guy who notices stuff like this. I'm sure you are too, Quinn.
No.
One of the things that really kind of bugs me, there's the programmer Cameron Howe. She's this hotshot hacker, and she's the programmer that they've hired to write the BIOS code without seeing IBM's code. And, she's going through the struggles and pulling her hair out and why isn't this working and this and that. Every time they show her desk, the computer on the desk changes. Sometimes it's a TRS-80. I saw the camera panned at one point and you saw like the first part of the logo, the Commodore PC-10 badge that used to be on the front of those desktops that Commodore made was there. And another time it was like a VT100 clone. It drives me nuts when they do that. And I'm not sure why, other than maybe they have a limited number of these props and they just sort of move them around from scene to scene and they don't keep track of what goes where as they shoot stuff.
Yeah, that's been bothering me a little bit too. Of course, I'm sure anyone listening to the show is going to do the same thing, which is fixate on the computers that are in the desks and in the background and so on to see what everyone has on their desks. And same with the computer that's in the home office of one of the main characters. It's changed a couple of times. I'm pretty sure it was an Apple II at one point, but now this most recent, it was something else that I didn't recognize. So, yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there. But.
Yeah, so, if you can get past those little nitpicks, though, it's a great show. Definitely worth a watch.
Sure.
Now, I tend not to be that much of a sitcom kind of guy, but there's a show called The Goldbergs, and it's produced by this actor, Adam Goldberg. You've seen him in stuff like Saving Private Ryan. I remember the first time I saw him seeing him was in Friends. He was Chandler's weirdo roommate for a couple of episodes. When Joey moved out, he's produced this television show based on his life growing up in the 80s called The Goldbergs. It airs on ABC every week, and humor is really subjective, and I'm not known for having a huge sense of humor. The Goldbergs, to me, isn't funny at all, so I had a hard time watching it. I've only watched the first 2 episodes, but I guess Adam grew up with an Apple II in his house because there's a scene where his father is trying to learn how to use this thing, and he plugs the disc in. Now they cut to the monitor, and I swear the text is like, he types like catalog or something, and the C is the size of a baseball. It's obviously not the text being generated by the Apple II, and the humor beat thing is he uses it for a second, cut to him sitting there with a smoking melted disc. And but what is neat about it is that all of the scenes in the show are generated from his life experiences, and during the credits you get to see the video that he took as a youth on this little portable 8mm he had that inspired each scene, so you get to see Adam actually using his Apple II in the 80s, and I thought that was kind of cool.
That would be cool. Yeah, I haven't seen the show, but it might be worth seeing the episode just for that.
Yeah, so check out the first episode, and if you got a DVR or something, I would download it and just like fast forward to scenes that look interesting, and because some of it is just like pointless pop culture references thrown in there to look cool and say I was there, which drives me nuts, but. And maybe the show will get better. Again, this is a first-year freshman comedy. So a couple of software releases here that I guess are worth mentioning. We talked about Sheppy a little bit earlier, his Sweet 16 2GS emulator that he released. He released version 3.0 at last year's KansasFest. He's now updated it to 3.0.3. So if you use that, definitely worth upgrading to the latest version. He's got his release notes. I'll have a link to that in the show notes that talk about the stuff that he's fixed. Now, I know that with the announcement of Yosemite, they've talked about they're retiring Xcode and moving to something called Swift. Is that right?
Well, not exactly. So Xcode is still the IDE. So the bomb they dropped at WWDC was they introduced a new programming language, and it's sort of going to presumably coexist for the most part with Objective-C for a while, and presumably the intention is to eventually switch over to Swift. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be probably a couple of years before that really happens, but that was a bombshell for sure.
Okay, because I know that there was some discussion about whether Sheppy's code was going to have to be rewritten from the ground up, and I think that it is going to for this new language, but
yeah, someday. I mean, it's going to be a while. The platform is still pretty married to Objective-C. I mean, Apple needed to do something because Objective-C still has it's a nice modern language, but it still has a lot of baggage from the 1970s, being a C derivative language, single pass header files and so on.
True.
So and you can't evolve a horse into a Model T. At some point, you got to throw everything away and start over. So that's
you got to shoot the horse.
yeah. So that's what Swift is, and wisely Apple knows it's going to take a couple of years to make that transition. So
okay, so he's got plenty of time. Do you hear that, Jeppy? You got plenty of time.
Lots of time.
I can say that because he doesn't listen to the show. Silver and Castle has been updated to version 9.5.1. For those who don't know, Silver and Castle is an adventure game for your Apple IIGS. This game was originally written because the programmers who wrote the Wizardry series said that Wizardry was so complex that it couldn't be written in BASIC. It had to be written in assembly. And of course, Apple II programmers, being the group that they are, said, I don't think that's true. And somebody went out and wrote this game. Now, by now, it's definitely moved beyond just the BASIC only components that it used to be. The original Silver and Castle was all in AppleSoft BASIC. And as it's expanded and grown over the years, it's since moved away from that because it met the challenge of, oh, yes, this can be written in BASIC. So if you are... if you're a fan of this game, like I am, the latest version is 9.5.1. You can get that now from Jeff Fink, who wrote the game. Are you an adventure gamer, Quinn?
Big time, yeah. Actually, the biggest project I ever built for the 2GS was an RPG. It was actually, my dream was to recreate Ultima VI, because I'm a massive Ultima fan, and I got teased by, I don't know if you've ever, bit of trivia here, so the Ultima VI box, for the PC or other platforms, the box has a reference to the Apple IIGS in fine print on the back.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah, so it it's listing all the copyrights that belong to other people, sort of the legal disclaimer, and it mentions that the Apple IIGS is a trademark of Apple. And so that started, there's this rumor that they were going to release Ultima 6 for the 2GS, and they never did because they stopped supporting the platform, and the rumor mill was swirling. Did it ever exist? Is there some prototype of it out there? Because that was sort of the ultimate Ultima was 6. It was kind of the pinnacle of the series. It kind of went downhill after that, in my opinion. And so I wanted it so badly that I basically decided to sit down and write it, and I wrote a tile-based RPG engine of that flavor. I never quite got it to the point of releasing it. It was a little too buggy in the end, but it is a full game, which I hopefully still have on floppies somewhere.
Haven't overwritten that one.
Yeah, I sure hope not, because there's a couple of years of my life in that one. But I think I've learned since then that Ultima 6 never did exist for the GS. In fact, I think I learned that just recently. There was an update on the What is the 2GS website about it, because they had a slot in their games list for it. Again, on the assumption that it may exist in prototype form somewhere, but I think someone from Origin, possibly even Richard Garriott, actually made a statement recently that it never existed, and that by the time they were done with Ultima V, they had already tooled up for PC development, and that was already their focus. So it never existed or had intended to exist.
Well, maybe you can convince Richard Garriott to release your version as the unofficial Ultima 6 for the 2GS.
Yeah, well, I actually, so after I got the engine up and running, I actually considered, I've got an engine that's capable of running some facsimile of Ultima 6, and I thought I just need the assets and the maps and so on, just need the content. So I actually, my naive, I would say probably 15-year-old self, wrote a letter to Origin and said, hey, I've got this engine, I'd like to port Ultima 6 to the GS, can I have your content? And something along those lines I may have offered to, let them release it, or who knows. But I got a very nasty letter, a cease and desist letter from Origin, and which I think I still have in a box somewhere. It's pretty priceless, explaining in no uncertain terms how important their IP was to them, and that I should cease and desist all such development immediately. So
you should frame that, or at least scan it and post it somewhere.
Yeah, I really hope I still have it somewhere, because it would be pretty great. And of course, I was certainly no threat to their empire, but it was funny to be treated as such.
Yeah, I guess in those days you never really knew.
Yeah, well, and of course the lawyer's answer is always going to be that. So,
BASIC has turned 50, the programming language, and took a moment to write an article on Gizmodo about how he wrote his version of Integer BASIC for the original Apple from scratch. And as I recall, that was done with basically a pencil and a pad of paper. And so that article is definitely worth checking out. And what I really appreciate about what Gizmodo did here was that it's basically, I think it's entirely his writing unedited. I mean, there's no changes or anything to it. So you can really hear, if you've ever heard Steve give one of his speeches or seen him on YouTube talking about this stuff, he's got a very distinct voice. And when you read this article, you can hear him saying that.
I found that with his book, IIGS, as well. I could hear him sort of reading it to me.
Yeah, I think that was ghostwritten by Gina Smith.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, so
it really sounds like him.
Yeah, I think she did a really good job of making sure that it was still, it was, we'll clean the stories up so that they are, make them, I guess, fit in chapters for publication, but definitely a good job of making sure it still sounded like Steve's voice.
Yeah, the tone definitely has that je ne sais was.
All right, and I guess finally, one quick note here, just to rub the Apple III thing in everybody's face one more time. The Apple III RTR, the ready-to-run emulator, is available from DataJerk's webpage. You can download it now. If you're interested in using an Apple III, they finally got emulation working in the MES emulator system. Well, setting up and getting MES running is exactly that. It's a bit of a mess. It's difficult. It's painful. And Egan, DataJerk, has taken all of the hard work out of that. It comes loaded with a bunch of ready-to-use software and hardware configurations. And if I know you can do this with the Windows scripting host or even probably batch files, and I'm pretty sure you could do the same thing with AppleScript. You just launch the MES executable with a bunch of different options, and that's what your Apple III hardware will look like in emulation. So definitely worth checking that out.
The Apple III has always been kind of a fascinating machine to me. I wonder, is there some sort of podcast or something where I could learn more?
Why, Quinn, you silver-tongued devil, you. So I do a monthly. Well, I guess we were originally going to do like every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, and it looks like it's going to be every month. I now do a podcast with Paul Hagstrom called Drop 3 Inches, which is based on Apple Computer's tech support recommendation to drop your Apple III 3 inches onto a desk to reseat the chips. And you can check that out. We'll have a link in the show notes. We've published 2 episodes. It's sort of interesting as we publish these. The people who worked at Apple at the time have been, I guess, listening, and they've been eager to talk about this. So we've got we actually have some great guests lined up for future episodes. So if you're interested in the history of the Apple III, tune in. I think we do a pretty good job, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, I have to concur. I've listened to both episodes and I'm really enjoying it. I'm learning a lot. The Apple III is genuinely something I've always been interested in. I used to see pictures of it in the magazines, and it was this sort of bizarre alien thing that was kind of Apple II-like, but not. And I was just always really interested in what this thing was. And then it just kind of quietly vanished and never really learned much about it. So.
Well, and I think that's been the experience of a lot of Apple II users. As I related in the podcast, I had hands-on experience with mine back in the day because my father used to bring us home from work every weekend. But even when I recently took a 3 to KansasFest for the first time, I had Apple II users walk in and go, "What is that?" Or say, "I've never been in a room with one of these things before." And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it didn't sell well at all because of the reputation that it got and because it was very expensive. It was aimed at the small business user. It wasn't meant for the home user. And so nobody really had these things at home to play with. And so like you, Quinn, most people read about it in the magazine or saw pictures and went, "What is this?" And then, "Oh God, this thing is terrible." And then it was gone. So.
And will there be one at KansasFest?
There will probably be several, I think, because I'm going to be giving at least one presentation, and I know that Paul will probably bring his, and I think Tony Diaz, we talked about his Apple 3.5-inch drive maintenance session. I think he's going to give one on Apple III maintenance, so that'll be really cool. I'm looking forward to that too.
Awesome. I look forward to seeing it when I am in attendance for my first time ever.
Well, I think you will have a great time, and I won't guarantee your money back if you don't, because I don't have that kind of money lying around. But I'm looking forward to seeing you there, Quinn.
Excellent.
And I think that pretty much wraps up this month's episode of Open Apple. I know it's been kind of a rough ride recently, and with Ken not contributing his wisdom and structure to the show, this may be a little bit weird. I hope everybody still enjoys and sticks around. I think we've got some great stuff coming up, and we'll see you all in a month.
Thanks for having me on the show. It was great.
Oh, and thank you for being on the show, Quinn.
No, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback by visiting us on the web at www.open-apple.net.